So it's interesting, right? So the first thing, and it's skills later on top of skills. So from the beginning, like I talked about the foundational stuff with the red dot, right? If they're not set up foundationally to be able to shoot the red dot, they're not going to be able to. The speed is the same thing. So if you start breaking down shooting down into the skills, right? So I need you to be able to, talking about it from the LEO side, really what I need you to be able to do is draw the gun as quickly as you can, right? What that means is time-wise is different to everybody, but let's say I need you to be able to shoot center mass, one shot at 7 yards in 1.25 seconds, right? So we start breaking that down into micro drills, right? So how fast does that mean your hand needs to be to the gun? Well, we try and get people, you start them off, kind of give them an extra time, and then start bringing that time down to where eventually we're pushing people to get their hand to the gun in 0.3 seconds, and then their gun out of the holster and index points in another 0.3 or 0.4, and then from index points to full presentation in that another 0.4. So now I have you getting the gun out of the holster to full presentation in a second, right? So then you have a quarter second to correct vision wise where the dot or where the sights are, and then press the trigger.
Welcome to the Firearms Nation podcast. Everybody who is tuning in live, I thank you. And anybody who's going to be listening to this podcast recording, of course, I love that you listen to the show, and I, appreciate if you subscribe to the show, whether you're subscribing on the podcast or whether you subscribe to this YouTube channel. By doing that, you get access to these shows as I post them live, which is kind of a cool thing. But anyways, tonight we're going to be delving into the mindset of a person who's been a Marine, who's also been in law enforcement in various capacities, and is also a really good competitive shooter. And I like to talk to people like this because, one, there's the familiar background, being a law enforcement trainer myself, and in competitive shooting, which if you've followed the show, you know how much it's changed my life. But I always like to get the perspective of somebody else who's doing the same thing and seeing the same problems that I've seen and how they've overcome them. So if you have questions, please post them towards the end if possible. And otherwise, listen to the show. So tonight I am talking with Sean Griffith, who is, like I said, a Marine, law enforcement officer, and a competitive shooter. So let me bring him on. Sean, how's it going?
Hey, Art, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Hey, listen, someone I had on the show not too long ago who's been a good friend of mine for many, many years. And we just lost Sean. So that's the beauty of live internet, live TV on the internet. I'll have to edit this part out of the podcast, but he'll be calling back, and that's him calling back. Good and song. We're back. Listen, that's the beauty of doing this live. Just keeps the energy level up. But as I was saying, and that could happen again because you're way up in the mountains of, I think, Croatia or something, right? That's where you're at.
Yeah, definitely. We'll go with that.
So, a good friend of mine was on the show not too long ago, Jack DeCristofalo, SWAT guy, excellent cop. He told me that he took a class with you, and I didn't know who you were at the time, but he said that what you were teaching was spot on, and that you were also a competitive shooter, which, like I said, really intrigued me. So I wanted to talk to you, and that's why I reached out. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to come on, become pretty good friends through all that at this point. So it's awesome.
So you were in the Marines. When did you get into the Marines? How long ago?
So I went in 2008 and then got out in 2012.
Still, were you very close with your dad?
Yeah, I was pretty close as there's always that period when you're that 18, 19, 20 period where you kind of butt heads, and then we very much have that. But then as I got older, we got a lot closer, and that was that.
So do you think his influence on you pushed you towards your passion with the firearms?
Yeah, for sure. So going back to the military stuff, it was a conversation when I was going into high school about what are we going to do afterwards. I kind of knew I was never going to go to college. The academic side of stuff was never really my strong suit. So we had talked about military. I had talked about Navy, Marines, all of those things, which eventually we can get into later. Got put on hold for a few years after high school, but he kind of pushed me in that direction. Not pushed me, but he encouraged whatever I wanted to do. So that all started from a young age, kind of that whole lifestyle, right? Like shooting and outdoors and hiking and all of those things that I still obviously carry on today. Was very much influenced by him. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems, I think I'm older than you, but when I was growing up, there was, at my high school, they did have a rifle club. So if you look at my yearbook, they got the pictures of people in a rifle club. There was an archery club. Nowadays, of course, that is very much taboo. Even like the junior ROTC is kind of frowned upon, even though these people are gearing up and learning stuff so they can eventually go in the military. But I think having those positive role models and a positive attitude and understanding of firearms takes away the mystique and just the glorified violence that we see on the movies and in the videos of the firearms, because there's two different sides to it. So I think we're missing that, and I don't think we'd ever go back to it. So in your experience growing up, what was it like in your area? Was it more positive towards firearms, or were you in that generation where it was starting to get really, really bad?
No, I think I just missed that generation where it got bad. So everybody I grew up with, and still where I'm from, again, it's a super rural area, so it's still very much the way I grew up. But it's kind of something that everybody did, right? Everybody that out just having to shoot a shotgun for the first time and do all of those kind of things. So I totally agree with you. So kind of on that same note with my kids, right? So my daughter's 11, my son's 7. We've taken the same approach that I grew up with, and my dad's grew up with, and his dad grew up with, the educational side of it, showing them, hey, this is what it's capable of. This is how you're safe with them, and kind of taking that mystique away from it. That way, if God forbid, right, my daughter ever came home and saw a gun, he knows exactly, he shot her before, right? So there's no question about what it does. There's no mystery there. So they don't mess with it, right? And I think when you start getting into that, all of that kind of stuff, that's missing, right? So they're very mystical to some folks growing up, and they don't understand what it's capable of.
Right. I think that if more people actually understood about guns, we'd have less of it. But obviously, it's a huge political issue. But it's just amazing to me, and I'm sure to you, that some people are just absolutely terrified of a firearm. Just, even just looking at it, it's nearby. Even, me as a law enforcement officer, if I come near them and I have a firearm on my hip, they're just immediately taken back by it. And it's like nothing's going to happen. And I'm actually here to help you and protect you. But some of these people are just like their minds are blown that there's this thing here that they've seen on TV and in the movies that can just blow people completely to bits. And I think it's an irrational fear that if there was more education, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but if there was just more education and more understanding, it'd be less of a political issue. But obviously, it can't be. It's up there with something like abortion, where it's just one side or other. There's like very few people in the middle ground.
Yeah, totally agree. Right. So in our culture with everything, there's a very much it's this way or that way, and there can be no gray area, and that's how a kid thinks, right? Like it's either mine or it's yours. It can't be ours and we share it. It's one way or the other, and that's not how, at least in my perception, rational adults think, right? Like I can think, regardless whatever you think, right? I can think that everybody should have guns, or I can think that nobody should have guns, but I should still understand that like if I think nobody should, some people are still going to need to, right? There's got to be those gray areas. And I think we culturally miss that quite a bit. It's one way or the other, and I won't listen to anything the other side has to say.
So I think the presidential debates going on, they should probably tune into this first, and pick up some insight on some gun issues, and then they can. Although I'm pretty sure all of them are going to be, anti-gun control, because politicians they'll say whatever they need to say just to get the vote. So you grew up around guns, and you made a decision to join the Marines. Why the Marines as opposed to say something like the Army?
So a little bit of backstory there, right? So I said I delayed when I went in. I didn't go in 17 or 18 like most folks do. So I was one of the older guys in my platoon on Parris Island because I didn't go in until I was 21. So I was sitting in Florida doing air conditioning. My family has an air conditioning company down at Fort Myers that they still run today. And I was doing that, right? It's South Florida, so it's 1,000 degrees in the attic in the middle of the day. And it kind of, I had a realization one day. I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, drinking Monsters, and just super unhealthy. And I looked around one day and was like, nope, I will not allow this to become my life. So that day I got in the van, or the next morning, with my uncle who owned the business, and said, hey, when we get done today, I need you to take me by the Marine Corps recruiter, because if I'm going to do something like join the military, I'm going to do something that's at the time, right? That's the hardest thing that you can possibly do, is go into the U.S. Marine Corps. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it big. And that's kind of what led my decision to go to the Marine Corps.
That was quite a shock at 21, going down there, 2 packs and Monsters, and then now you're in, which is equally horrible heat in Parris Island.
Yeah, correct.
Being
correct.
Screamed at by a DI. When you went in, did you have any interest in a particular area?
No, I didn't really care. I was just looking for a way out. So I went in, sat down, talked to the recruiter. I was like, hey, I want to sign a contract today. I don't really care. I don't have any life plans. I haven't been looking forward to this since I was a little boy. This is I need some other direction, and this is the direction that I'm going to take. Right. So my recruiter had a super easy job. He didn't have to talk. He didn't have to sell it to me or anything like that. Like, I don't need that talk. I just need a contract. So what I ended up signing was a Presidential Security Forces contract. But when I got to MEPS to actually go to Parris Island, right, to ship out, I'm 3 hours from the house at this point. So me at 21, having no real life experience, I'm fully committed, or so I think. So I got to MEPS, and the gunny at MEPS said you cannot go into a Presidential Security Force contract with tattoos outside your sleeve line. So essentially told me my recruiter didn't do me any favors there. So I had a couple of options, right? I could go in, or I could go home. I could sit down with the recruiter, pick a different MOS, figure out, but that's going to delay things. I'm already committed to this point. Or I could ship on an open contract. Again, me being 21 with no life experience, I chose the latter. So I shipped on an open contract. So when I went in, pretty much almost to the end of my boot camp, I had no idea what direction I was going. I didn't really care, as long as it was something cool.
And what did you end up as your MOS?
So I was a comm guy. I ended up getting communications. It ended up working out pretty well. So I think there was 10 or 11 guys in my platoon that were on open contracts. I think everybody but me got flyer admin, which with my personality, I don't think that would have been super awesome. So it was a blessing in disguise getting a comm contract. And that was kind of that. I didn't really have a say in the matter whatsoever. So
you ship overseas to Afghanistan, coming from a small rural town. How did that affect you?
It was, at the time I was 2010. So I was 23 at the time. I had no real attachments back here. I was just kind of ready to go at that point, right? That's kind of the whole reason that I joined for was to go do all of those things. So it was exciting for me. It was a super exciting time. I still miss it, right? Maybe not the life, but the people you meet and the camaraderie and all that kind of stuff. So you still look back and I don't know if it's a regret, but it's definitely something you think about. Like, hey, should I have stayed in, right? Because in that world, I excelled pretty well at it. It was a lifestyle that fit my personality. So was law enforcement in that whole world too. But that's a whole next chapter. But I still look back on it. But it was good. I was ready to go.
Well, so after that 4th year, that was it. You shipped out. You didn't want to stay and do anything else.
So when I went in originally, it was, let me backtrack a little bit. I said I had a cousin in Fish and Wildlife. So when I was 19, he took me on a ride along. This is kind of the whole reason I wanted to get in law enforcement.
In Florida?
In Florida, yep. He's in Immokalee.
Yep, that's a
so
good.
We were out
unit.
there. Yeah, it was super cool. We went on a ride along, and I went on a couple. This particular night, we were in the truck. So he parked the truck behind some palmetto bushes. We climbed up a tree, fully camoed out, and him and another FWC officer put a decoy deer out, like a mechanical decoy deer out in the field about 100 yards. So you got one of the officers maybe 50 yards in a bush away from the deer, and me and my cousin are in the tree probably 150 yards across the road, right? And what they're trying to do is see if anybody's going to shoot this deer at night, right? Spotlighted from the road. So they had put this out, I don't know how many times over the past 5 years. I've never had anybody shot it. But this night, we're sitting in a tree. I'm 19. I don't have a gun. I don't know anything about anything. And a car pulls up and shoots it 4 or 5 times with like a 270, literally right below us on the road. And I mean, again, at that point in my life, right, like I'm scared. I don't know what to do. So I look up, my cousin's above me. He's pointing down. He's like, go. So I pretty much fall out of the tree, hit the ground. He comes out after me, sprints over to the truck, picks me up on the side of the road, and then it's a felony stop at that point. And I'm sitting in the truck while he's doing this traffic stop, and the other FWC officers there, and I'm just like, this is the coolest thing in the world. I have to do this, right? Then you start thinking, like, how do I get into that? I need a college degree or military, and that was one of the things that led to me joining the Marine Corps in the first place.
So you were ready to get out at that point, and you wanted to sign up with a law enforcement agency.
Yep. So I did my 4 years. I got out and wanted to go into law enforcement.
Very cool. So where did you end up going for your first stint?
In law enforcement?
Yep.
So I went. I was with a federal agency in Maryland, one of the 3-letter agencies. I was a uniformed police officer for them for 8 years, and that was the only department I was with.
Okay, so why did you pick the feds after having that cool experience with FWC?
Because again, you get out right on. So at this point, I'm 25. I don't know anything about anything still. Fresh out of the Marine Corps, so I put in applications to pretty much every law enforcement agency in Maryland, right? So like the Carolina County Sheriff's Department, Maryland State Police, and then the agency I eventually got hired with. And they were the first to call me back. They called me back. Their starting pay was significantly higher than what any state or county offices were even close to. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Okay. And uniformed, I'm trying to think of the federal, I mean, if you don't want to mention the name, you don't have to. But most of the federal stuff, though, is kind of different than the local stuff.
Very much so.
Personally, I think like the 1811 or I guess we call special agent, the guys in the suits, they tend to have more fun, so to speak, quote unquote fun, than the uniform guys. Was that kind of your experience, that they made you have more of a security position than doing the drug busts and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely right. So uniform police federally is largely, I got to be careful because somebody's going to get angry, but it's largely a security guard position, right? So it's anti-terrorism kind of stuff, right? It's entry control and those kind of things. So you're really not doing, unless it comes pretty much straight to you, you're not doing the DUI stops and the drug, the interdiction stuff, right? You're not really running traffic, unless it knocks on your doorstep.
And don't get me wrong, there are some non-1811, non-special agent positions in the federal government, in federal law enforcement that are pretty cool, but they're hard to come by. I can think of like park stuff and Department of Interior stuff that, yeah, you're out there by yourself kind of like FWC, but in a national park. So there are some cool things out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even air marshals, I don't think are 1811 at this point. So
I
yeah,
believe they are.
They got it, because I thought they were for a while. They were 1801s. I know they were fighting for it, but they might have gotten it.
I think you're right. I think they are 1801s.
And for people who are listening, these are just designators that is like for like pay. I think, I don't know how they come up with these numbers, but I think it's in terms of the different job classifications in USA jobs. Yeah. Okay, so you spend you said 8 years in federal law enforcement. Was that it? You just had it and you're like, I'm done with this stuff, I want to move on? Or
no,
did other opportunities present themselves?
Yeah, so I spent 4 years in our operations division, right? So just what most departments would call a patrol, or kind of doing the daily stuff. Then I went to our training unit with the police agency that I was with, so teaching firearms and stuff, and all of that. In service, right? All of those kind of things. And then from there, I got offered a detail, a PCS, right? So a 3 to 5 year detail down to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center down here in Georgia. That was in 2017. So at that time I came down here, I was still with the police. I'm still employed by DOD with the agency that I was with. Came down to Georgia to be effectively an adjunct instructor for here at the training center. And then in 2020, my 3-year detail was coming up, right? So I had a decision to make. Do I extend for a year? Do I go back to Maryland, back to the police, or do what I did, which is there was full-time permanent positions open down here with Homeland Security. So I ended up taking one of those.
You're not currently still working, or are you still working with them?
No, I still work. I work at
for
Homeland Security for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center.
Oh, wonderful. As a trainer or in a different position?
Nope, I'm a firearms instructor there. So the training center's huge. I mean, it's massive. There's, I don't know, a couple thousand students on campus every day. So I teach firearms all day, every day, 5 days a week, and then usually on the weekend for myself as well.
Okay, so I know a lot of law enforcement, federal law enforcement, are using. Some use SIG, but a lot of them are using the H&K. Very few. Although there are some that are using Glocks. What are, because you're getting, when you're in the federal government, you're getting all these different types of departments coming to you. So do you have one that you use all the time, or are you mixing it up depending on who you're teaching?
Yeah, so that's agency dependent, right? So whatever gun they got the contract for is what they're going to carry, and then whatever they carry is what they're going to train with. So a ton of SIGs. And a ton of Glocks is usually the gun. There's a few that are shooting M&Ps. H&Ks are pretty much done federal agency wise as far as I know. I haven't seen an H&K in a long time, but the majority is 320s or Glocks.
Okay, so that's what that you end up using in your training.
Yeah, so we'll shoot generally whatever the students are shooting.
Okay.
Given the choice, if I have a choice, right? So we run like an advanced pistol program, that kind of stuff. So when I get to choose what gun I'm going to shoot an M&P. So I shoot a 5-inch M&P 2.0 or with a red dot.
With a red dot. So I was going to ask you, I know in the local scene, it's a weird way to say it, but in local police departments, red dots are now super prevalent. Everybody wants a red dot. Is that the same for the feds? Are they going to red? Because I know I believe just all my years, it's so much easier to get things done at the local level than it is the federal level. The federal level, as you go up, like the state, for state stuff, state troopers, they always get the short end of the stick on a lot of stuff because it takes an act of Congress, like the state legislator, to get them to get a pay raise or whatever, whereas, locally it's much easier. It's just a commission. So at the federal level, you just got to imagine how much stuff is in the way and big contracts, because nothing moves big and fast in the federal government. So are red dots making the scene there? Yeah,
so they're like you said, right? Federally, everything's going to take longer. It's just more more stuff it has to go through. But right now we're seeing a lot of red dots. A lot of agencies are changing over, and I think here in the coming years, it'll be more rare to see an iron sighted gun in an LEO holster than it will be to see an iron sight. We're not there yet. We're slowly changing. So as the agencies adopt them and the selling it to the agency, right, which it's not my job, just to be clear, right? So the agency, they decide whatever they want. We just train them on whatever they have. But you're seeing agencies pretty quickly go to the red dot, because once you get those guys that make the decisions on them, like, hey, just come out and shoot this thing one time. It's 50 yards shooting an 8-inch blade, and you can get somebody doing that in 3 minutes where they've never been able to do that, stuff like that. So it's pretty evident, the benefits of it. So we're seeing it change over rapidly right now.
So my whole thing, and I've said it before, I'm sure people think I'm a broken record. The deal with the red dots, and I've been shooting red dot now for 5 years. But I'm going back to production. I've been shooting production. 'Cause I think it's more funner. But look, it's definitely fun to squirt bullets running around like an open guy does with a regular type gun, which is kind of regular, not completely, but kind of regular. But I just think, the coming up with, you got to really worry about those 10 rounds. If I take 2 makeup shots, I can throw up my whole stage plan. And it's just a little bit more challenging. So regardless, my thing with officers, and when I was teaching officers with the red dot, is getting them to commit. Like you and I, we're committed to it. Like I made that change over to the red dot once I could carry it at work. And then both competition and work were both the same. I have 2 different training things I'd worry about. And I put the reps in. I put the dry reps in every day. How are you getting, because I can only imagine at the federal level, they're sending people in. It's not just people in your area. They're sending people in from all over the country. They take a class with you and they got to go away. So how do you keep them current and able to get the dot without having to fish for it every time they're drawing?
And that's the big question, right? So, in my opinion, it really starts with the foundation laid at the beginning. So what we found so far kind of across the board is if you take somebody new, put a red dot pistol in their hand, they generally don't have a lot of trouble. It's the guys that have, like us, that have been doing this for a long time, that have never seen the red dot. Now they're trying to switch to it. Now they're really struggling to find the red dot. All those issues start to come up. And you get, so it's interesting to me because outside of the LE world, you have these guys out there who are like, yo, you need to dry fire more, you need to dry fire more. And while I don't disagree with that, us in the training environment, right, we're very much training to a time standard. You have this amount of time, and they have to achieve this goal by the end of it, right? That's the goal. So you don't have all the time to, hey, we're going to do 8 hours of dry fire throughout this week, right? Because you only have 2 hours with them this week. So you have to find ways to make it work. But again, if you can set that foundation for somebody early on how to present the gun, right? So I talk about this a lot where you have the guys that struggle with the red dot, right? So they've shot iron sights for years. They're relatively proficient with it. And then you put a red dot on the gun and they can't find the dot for whatever reason. And I think generally that happens because their presentation of the gun from the outset wasn't correct, right? So they're presenting the gun. They've got 2 points of reference, a front sight and a rear sight. So as the gun gets presented, it can be a little bit off, and they see that and can correct it, right? So by the time the gun gets to presentation, they've seen misaligned sights to some degree. They've corrected that. And then by the time it gets to presentation, they're good to go. You do that for 10 years and you can get pretty quick at that to the point where you're not even thinking about correcting it. It's not a conscious action, right? You just push the gun out, correct the sights, and they can generally break the shot at presentation. And then you put that same person on a red dot. Well, the red dot doesn't have 2 points of reference, right? It's only got the one. It's only got the red dot. So if I present the gun just a little bit off axis in any direction, I can't reference it off of anything else on the gun to see where I'm at, right? So then you have somebody who presents the gun, the gun's misaligned a bit, and they don't have references off of, so they don't know where to fix it. And that's why you get the guy who's got the gun and trying to find the red dot, because again, they have nothing to reference the dot off of. Going back to what I said earlier, though, if that shooter would have been set up foundationally strong from the beginning and had somebody telling them, hey, the gun needs to be level on both axes, horizontal and vertical, during presentation, right, and kind of just arrive to where you're at level. When you switch them over to the red dot, they would have had no issue, right? So it's a failure from the beginning, I think, and that's why you see guys struggle with it now.
I forgot to ask. So you're a full-time instructor now, and you went into training before you took this full-time position. Where did you develop your skill, do you think? Because like for me, like I got into training, I started taking, like back then it was like 2010, so Magpul was everything all over the internet. They were just crazy. So
I remember those days. Yeah.
And they sent me to those classes and, developed a lot of bad habits. But since I had done that, that was completely different than what people were training back then. Just completely, both rifle and handgun, just completely different. But for me, I started to get better at shooting when I started to compete, because it kind of forced me to see what people were doing, and not to say that everyone who gets better is a competitor, because there's plenty of good guys out there, good dudes that are competitors. Generally, most of them are, but there are some tactical dudes that have put the time in just by being able to put the time in that are good. So what did you get it from the Army? Don't shoot me. Did you get it from the Marine Corps?
That's dangerous.
Did you get it from the Corps? Or
no, absolutely not.
How did you get it?
Same thing as you, right? So I started competing and started with IDPA. It was the only club that was within an hour when I lived in Maryland. And I showed up there being a decently proficient law enforcement shooter, right? Like I always shot high experts on all the flaws and all the stuff. I could beat generally most of the officers that I was shooting with. So I showed up to my first match. I'm going to show these guys something. Turns out I wasn't. And so I showed up my first match by myself. I wanted to go shoot a pistol match. I'd heard like it's pretty cool. I actually watched the very first season of Top Shot with JJ and Blake McGill. Saw the Grandmaster. I was like, I'm going to be a Grandmaster. That title sounds cool, right? So I went and shot my first match thinking I was just going to absolutely dominate, and I finished probably middle of the pack. I don't even remember. And then through that, right? So like you said, you have no choice. Either you start figuring stuff out, or you just get left behind. You just keep getting beat, right? So there was a guy at the local club who was an IDPA master at the time, who to me, like, he was like walking on water when he was shooting, right? It was incredible to watch compared to what I had seen. So I just started asking a bunch of questions like, hey, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Why'd you take this target here? And like, how are you like moving between the targets so fast? And all those things. And you start to hear these explanations, and then eventually you stumble across like the Enos forum, and you start to read, and it's a snowball effect. But for me, it very much, and I recommend every officer I ever talk to, like, hey, you need to be competing. It is the number one way to develop skill. If you have any level of commitment, right? If you go out and shoot matches, you're going to get better. You have no choice. So the competitive world is at 100%. I didn't take a class. I took a class from Steve Anderson a few years ago when I first made production GM. And then I just took a class with JJ through that Blue Line project last year, or maybe the year before. And those were the only classes I'd taken. So I was a Grandmaster before I took my first class. And that was just through kind of that trial and error, figuring stuff out. Because again, the competitive world doesn't let you just kind of float around the middle if you have any kind of motivation.
Yeah, you told the IDPA guy, I want to be a Grandmaster, and they just kind of looked at you cross-eyed, right? No,
see, I was very good about kind of, I understood where, after I took that first beating, I understood very much where I stood, right? So like, I'm not at these guys' level. So I just kind of kept my mouth shut and just started asking like technical questions, right? Like, how is your gun? It doesn't even look like it's recoiling, right? Like, how are you shooting down 0 on every stage but 2? Like, how is that possible at the speeds that you're shooting at? And then you start to kind of go down this rabbit hole. And at the time, this is almost 10 years ago, the information wasn't as readily available, but it very much was still available. You could still find it out there if you really looked.
So for me, my favorite question I asked when I first started was, I asked this guy, do you want to be fast, or do you want to be accurate? And He looked at me and he goes, yes. And I go, wait, no, you want to be fast or want to be accurate? And he goes, yes. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I got to be fast and accurate. Well, that's really the challenge, is to be able to do both at the same time. So when did you switch over to USPSA?
So 2018, sorry, I'm trying to get a phone charger hooked up to the phone real quick. 2018, I shot IDK Nationals and I won stock service pistol, kind of with no expectation. I wasn't prepared. I kind of didn't really know what I was getting into, first Nationals ever in anything. So I won stock service pistol. So the following year, the World Shoot, the IDK World Shoot was coming up, and I applied to the World Shoot and I didn't get in. So at that point, I kind of explored other options, right? So if I can't defend my title, I'm going to go somewhere else. So I shot my first USPSA match in I think that same year. So I had shot 1 or 2 USPSA matches, and I immediately saw the value as far as speed and accuracy goes, right? To what we need cops to do, right? I need you to be accurate fast. The value of that versus what I was doing. So after that, I switched over to USPSA exclusively, and that's what I've been doing since.
So that brings up a question that someone asked me, and I'll get back to competition, but since you mentioned the whole fast and accurate, so because you're an instructor and you're teaching cops, you're teaching privates, how do you teach cops a process so they can shoot at performance levels and in training, and before they're involved in a shooting, so they don't have panic fire? And I am going to repeat this. Those of you that are watching, you're watching me, and this has been definitely the podcast live show from hell, because he was plugging in his phone and managed to disconnect, because I really, really, really wanted to get that answer. But I do see I have a question here, and I'll throw it up from my good friend Steve. Why don't Leos carry H&K anymore? Do any carry Walther? So the deal with H&K, from my experience, primarily being in a firearms division for 10 years, we did allow H&Ks at my agency as one of the guns that you can use. However, H&K does not have the same type of built-in support in the country that they do overseas. So in the overseas, they have tons of support in the European market. In America, there isn't any. So a lot of the stuff you'd have to farm out to people who are not technically working for the company. And if you need to send somebody to the company, that means you're sending it overseas. So that was big, and then the expense. So a lot of these guns, whereas a Glock for law enforcement could probably be anywhere from $400 to $500, and H&K is costing you anywhere from $800 to $900. So there's the cost. The magazines are very expensive. So those are primarily the reason. They're still great guns. They're fun guns to shoot, but they're very expensive. And as far as Walthers are trying to get into the market. You gotta remember, it's all about money. So there's some big ones in there. SIG and Glock are primarily the biggest ones that are out there, especially Glock in law enforcement. So for Walther, they're great guns. There's a lot of good competitors who are using them. They just have to be able to get in front of the right people to be brought in. And you're dealing with, mega $1 million contracts. So people are very defensive of it. And a lot of times people don't want to take the chance on the new gun, right? It could be a great gun, but we've been using this gun forever. So why are we going to go in with that? So Sean is back. I was just someone had a question about, why Leos don't carry H&Ks. And so I was trying to just give my two cents on that.
Yeah, it's all contractual.
Yeah. So now that you're back, I'm going to bring up that question again. You all plugged in this time?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. I was saying this is one live show for the books. So, okay, I have a question that was brought up since we were talking about speed and accuracy and competition and bringing that over to law enforcement. But what is the process that you teach to cops, to Leos, that get them to see and shoot at performance levels in training before they actually get into a shooting, so they don't have what we see a lot, which is panic fire?
Yeah, actually, Jack and I were having this exact conversation at lunch today. So it's interesting, right? So the first thing, and it's skills later on top of skills. So from the beginning, like I talked about the foundational stuff with the red dot, right? If they're not set up foundationally to be able to shoot the red dot, they're not going to be able to. The speed is the same thing. So if you start breaking down shooting down into the skills, right? So I need you to be able to, talking about it from the LEO side, really what I need you to be able to do is draw the gun as quickly as you can, right? What that means is time-wise is different to everybody, but let's say I need you to be able to shoot center mass, one shot at 7 yards in 1.25 seconds, right? So we start breaking that down into micro drills, right? So how fast does that mean your hand needs to be to the gun? Well, we try and get people, you start them off, kind of give them an extra time, and then start bringing that time down to where eventually we're pushing people to get their hand to the gun in 0.3 seconds, and then their gun out of the holster and index points in another 0.3 or 0.4, and then from index points to full presentation in that another 0.4. So now I have you getting the gun out of the holster to full presentation in a second, right? So then you have a quarter second to correct vision-wise where the dot or where the sights are, and then press the trigger. And then I need you to be able to fire that first round. Then we start talking about additional rounds, right? So what happens when the gun goes off and going to go into recoil? So how do I guarantee hits at real speed, and what makes that possible? So we talk about getting the gun to be able to return where it left from, right? So I don't really care where it goes. I just need it to come back exactly where it left from, and I need that to happen as quickly as it can. So what makes the gun return in the first place? And that's going to be largely visually dependent, and then grip stuff is what's going to mechanically return the gun, right? So you start breaking down all those skills individually and having shooters kind of work through that, figuring out, hey, if my wrists are here, right, if I have this wrist angle and the gun's not returning back to where it left from, what if I experiment a little bit and ease up on that wrist angle? Does that bring the gun back better? Or maybe I need to have that wrist angle a little bit more forward, and does that bring the gun back better? So through that, right, through breaking down all the individual skills, or at least components of each skill, start working them to the level that you need them at, and then kind of reapplying those isolated skills back into the full shooting. It's not terribly difficult to be able to get somebody to be able to run the gun at what we would consider reasonable pace for an officer, maintain a high level of accuracy at a high level of speed. But that's how that needs to be done. Is the skills have to be broken down and isolated. You got to give people the opportunity to explore things, right? We've done a really bad job in our community of not allowing our shooters to fail, right? So the adage of you're accountable for every round. Totally agree with that out in the street, right? When you're doing the job, you're 100% accountable for every round. We can't be shooting bullets out into the wilderness and letting them hit whatever we want. But in a training environment, it's a necessary thing. You have to let people shoot at paces that they've never seen, understanding that the result isn't going to be awesome the first time you do it, right? So like if I put somebody on a bill drill and say, hey, I need you to shoot, let's say a 3.5 second bill drill, an officer. Well, if they've never shot, if they can't physically shoot the 3.5 second bill drill, they for sure can't do it accurately and maintain accuracy, right? Until they can do it at all, they can't do it accurate. So getting people to kind of shoot to new standards, to higher standards, right? Running the guns faster and harder while maintaining the accuracy and all that kind of stuff, and breaking down each of those little skills. You can get folks to shoot the gun really, really well, and it's not even that difficult. It's just the change in culture and how we're doing that training.
Well, what would you tell someone who's listening, watching in law enforcement, they don't get that much time behind the gun. But what can they be doing that could at least take them to the next level besides competing? Because obviously that'll do it, but maybe just not everyone has the competitive drive in them. So what can they be doing that can help them prepare for their next gunfight or their only gunfight?
Yeah. Dry fire is always the answer to that. Now, I think the part, again, just having watched some of the officers dry fire and do their thing, right? So you hear, I'm sure you've heard it, where, hey, before you go out on shift, dry fire, like give me 10 draws or 20 draws. That's all I need from you. Just do that. The part that we really miss as trainers is pushing them like, hey, when you do those 20 draws, if you just draw the gun, that's pretty good, holster the gun, and don't really evaluate consciously what just happened, right? Did you actually feel pressure in the gun when it got to extension? Did you see sights where you wanted to hit on whatever you're using as a target, whether it's a light switch or in your house or a scale target or whatever? If you're doing trigger presses and all that kind of stuff, right? Like when you press the trigger, are you feeling your hands and kind of brace for that and moving the gun all around? Dry firing is the answer for that, but it has to be conscious dry fire. They have to pay attention to what's happening. And if something's wrong, right? So let's say I draw the gun and dry fire, I'm going out on shift and I don't feel pressure in the gun like I want to. I need to consciously correct that. Like, nope, that's what that's supposed to feel like. Then it's kind of a conscious thing to make sure that's what I'm feeling, right? So that's the part we miss is getting officers to pay attention when they are dry firing, if they are going to dry fire.
You said something that I completely skipped over and I want to come back to now. You said that you made GM in production before you even took something like Steve Anderson. How did you do that? How long did it take you?
I'm trying to think back. So I started in IDPA. It's a little misleading because I started in IDPA in 2014, and at a very casual level. When I shot my first USPSA match, I had already shot a bunch of IDPA matches. I was an IDPA master in stock service pistol. And then I shot a classifier match for USPSA. It was actually my very first match ever. I didn't even know it was a classifier match. I had no idea. So I went straight into A class in production. So from the time of my first match, USPSA match, to GM was about a year. But again, that's kind of misleading because I had shot 3 years of IDPA prior to that. So the competitive side of it, right? A little bit of the gaming, kind of learning that stuff. I had some time on, but it was about a year first match to GM in production.
What was it that you did? You think that made it, because, getting to A class it's an achievable thing that most people can do, but getting up to master and GM, things have to be just so refined. And then of course there's a mental aspect to it. What did you think it was for you?
Yeah. So there's a couple, kind of key moments where my shooting, right, where I was making improvements, but I had significant jumps. One of them was I watched a random YouTube video. Like I said, when I was getting into this, when I was doing all this, I read and watched everything from everybody that I could find. So I watched a random video from Ben Steger, and he was talking about grip. It was one of his class videos, and he held the gun up kind of by his side and was like, you should feel that crushing pressure like this. And I watched that in the video. I don't do that. So the next opportunity I got to the range, the next day, whatever, I took it to heart, right? So I squeezed the gun as hard as I could with my support hand, and the gun was like a laser, right? So the gun just bang and returned right where it left from. It was like I had seen something crazy, like, oh my God, that's how that's supposed to look, right? So from there, I had made A class without that. I kind of watched that, and that was a huge jump, right? Just getting the gun under real control, right? Having the gun leave and return back to exactly where I wanted it to. That in and of itself was probably got me to M class, right there. And then from there, it's just kind of dry firing, right? So I watched a ton of videos. I watched a video, I think Vogel put it out years ago, about how, like, hey, close your eyes, present the gun, open your eyes. The sights, it doesn't matter what they're aligned to, but they need to be aligned with each other, right? And that tells you that the gun is getting presented the way it's supposed to be, right? So I saw that video early on, and when I was kind of getting into all this, and I did that a ton. Look, things like that, and just dry fire, right? So my dry fire schedule, hasn't changed much over the years, and I pretty much 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So I put the kids to bed, or my wife and I put the kids to bed, and then I generally go put the gun belt on and dry fire for 30 minutes. And again, I learned, I don't know from where, maybe the Enos forum or something, I learned very early on that if you dry fire, pay attention to what's happening and correct anything that's not going the way you want it. So kind of from the get-go, I had that in my mind. So I was very analytical and paid attention, and I still do it today, right? If I draw the gun out in a dry fire and it's not pointed where I want it to point, I don't just holster it, fix it. That's what that's supposed to feel like. Now I go back to holster, and that progression, that dry fire, a year later, I think the stars aligned and the math lined up, and I made GM in production.
Now your sponsorship with Team Tanfolio, is that an actual, like, they're paying you, or it's a gun sponsorship? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I understand the question. It's a real thing. So Tanfolio this year, at the end of last year, they set out to build a pro team. And they already had, so Casey Reed, Stephen Lutman, Bobby McGee, Joanna Wilson, and then I'm pretty sure I was the last to come onto the team. So they wanted to build a pro team to kind of build Tampo up, and get them back to being one of the heavy hitters in the competitive world. So they reached out to me. I through some connections. I had some good friends. They recommended me. I talked to the general manager of Italian Firearms, the importer, and we hit it off. It was obviously a good match on both ends for us, and it's been really good.
Well, that's awesome. It's good. I mean, I used to have one. I was able to sell it for a lot of money, but because listen, it's kind of like a unicorn gun. Especially back when I got it, it was so hard to come by.
Yep.
But the thing is that it's you got to learn that double action trigger. You've got to learn it. And back in the day, I had my carry gun was a double action gun, so it was easy to make that transition. But nowadays, I would not trust any cop with a double action gun, because universally they're like, I throw that first round to, and like, as soon as they say I throw that first round, I'm like, okay, yeah, give me that gun. Try this. It's called a SIG, or try this as a Glock, and you're gonna find it's much easier. You don't have to throw any shots. But no, it's cool that you're shooting carry optics, and you did really well this past year in carry optics. So congratulations. So you put on your own training aside from the federal stuff. You teach classes. You just teach privately. How does that work?
Yeah, so I teach classes, trying to build that into a little bit more than what it is in the past. I've done it for, I think this is really my second year doing it, and really focusing on the performance shooting aspect, right? So no tactics, none of that. Just how do I run the gun as hard and as fast as it can be run? It's kind of the classes that I'm doing, 2-day format, not dissimilar to anyone else out there, except largely my clientele, because of my background, has been law enforcement agencies across the country, kind of bringing that performance shooting aspect to cops, right? Again, you take whatever tactics your department is using, right? I'm not changing any of that, but when the gun comes out, this is how it needs to come out. When you have that use of force decision made that I need to use deadly force, this is how we apply that deadly force the fastest and most accurate way. And that's kind of the thing, right? It's a high level of accuracy at a high level of speed. So it's always funny when I talk about, I think I generally do it in a target transition block at where I work. I always ask classes, right? Like, so, hey, we're transitioning target to target, right? So in the law enforcement world, can we sacrifice accuracy or speed? And it's a trap I've set for them, right? They'll answer one way or the other. It doesn't matter which answer they go, because it's wrong, right? So we're not going to sacrifice accuracy or speed. We need the best of both worlds in the career field that we're in. And that's been the big push for me outside of there is the 2-day classes to try and bring this performance shooting side to law enforcement. And I'll tell you, I've been traveling around more so this year than ever, and probably more next year than this year. But there's kind of this stigma with the competitive side and the LE side, and it still exists. It still very much exists, although it is getting better. The second you get guys actually on the range and show them and having them doing things that they've never been able to do after 15, 20 years on the gun, it's eye-opening. And in my experience, guys have been super open to, like, why isn't this just what we're doing out the gate, right? Like, why isn't this basic academy stuff? And my answer to that is, I don't know. It should be.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. I see it slowly changing.
Yep.
But unfortunately, a lot of places still have, pull the trigger and pin it to the rear, wait for that reset. And I'm like, but
please stop.
It's Sean Griffith Shooting. That's your company.
It's Griffith Shooting Solutions.
Griffith Shooting Solutions.
And so that's we got a website up and everything, and on social media, on Instagram mainly, I'll put out classes and stuff like that. If they're open to the public, a lot of the online classes, right? That's not me who's saying this is LE only. It's because of the range that's hosting it, or they can only have LE. And I also teach competitive classes, right? I do think the competitive side of it is a bit saturated right now, right? Everybody who's halfway decent in the competitive world is out there teaching, which is good. Don't get me wrong, right? The more people out there putting out good information, I think the better we all are. But in the LE community, not a lot of guys are bringing the performance shooting to the LE side of things in a way that's meaningful, right? So I just had this conversation recently where we as trainers have done a bad job of kind of explaining how each thing you're doing competitively directly translates to law enforcement, right? So I use the example of like target transitions. So is it likely, and again, you can find outliers if you really look, but is it likely that three guys shoulder to shoulder are going to come at you with a gun and I'm going to transition 2, 2, and 2 through them, right? Like, no, it's not our typical shooting. It's not what's going to happen. So why is it important that we work on things like the Blake drill and how to transition through targets? And as soon as you explain, like, hey, your goal when you transition to a target is to see a spot and bring the gun directly to that spot, right? To get it stopped precisely. That way, if you have to, you could shoot. Well, if I'm on a warrant service and I'm clearing a house, right? And I go in through the door, I take my corner and I see movement out of the corner of my eye. Well, my vision needs to go to that. The gun needs to go there directly to the spot, stop precisely. Now, if I shoot or not is a use of force decision, right? That's something different. But the actual vision going and the gun coming there is the back end of a transition, right? So there's 10,000 examples of how all those competitive skills apply directly to the LE world. We've just done a really bad job of explaining how, right? So when I do my classes, I try and make those connections frequently. That way they kind of see like, hey, that makes sense.
Very cool. And I want to thank you for taking time and working through all these technical issues to be on the show. I think we still were able to get your message out, and I'll link down below. When I say down below, obviously, in whatever posting this is, to your Instagram page and to your website so people can find you. But Sean, thank you so much. Thank you for what you do. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.